確かに。
新たな関係と友情を祝って。
そしてお互いの繁栄を願って。すぐに立たねばならないのが残念ですよ。ここからの眺めは素晴らしい。
この次はご一緒に食事でも。うちの料理長が作る広東料理は景色に勝るとも劣らないものでしてね。
それは嬉しいお誘いですな。しかしレッドドラゴンの幹部と食事をする日が来ようとは。
毒は入っていませんからご安心を。
Hi everyone, nice to see you back on the channel. Today we're going to be looking at Cowboy Bebop again. This is going to be the first video in a series of 4 based on stuff taken from episode 5. This is one of the classic episodes of Cowboy Bebop. It shows the first real confrontation between Skype and Vicious. I'm not actually going to be taking the most important parts of the anime. I'm going to be taking some of the more peripheral parts and looking at those. The more important parts, the central dialogues, if you like, between Skype and Vicious, I could look at those in the future if people were interested. But today we're going to look at some of the more peripheral parts of the dialogue. The fact that they're peripheral doesn't mean the Japanese is any less interesting, of course.
確かに。
新たな関係と友情を祝って。
そしてお互いの繁栄を願って。確かに。
新たな関係と友情を祝って。
そしてお互いの繁栄を願って。
Okay, so the language being used here is obviously quite formal. This is a business meeting of sorts, albeit between two criminals. The question I want to ask here is, why do these two utterances both end in the te form? They don't seem to be full sentences, but what are they? It's not that easy to give a nice, clean, simple explanation, but the basic point that has to be made here is that these two utterances are obviously incomplete. Nothing's ever complete, strictly speaking, if it ends in the te form. Personally, I don't like it when people liken the Japanese te form to the ing form in English, which is either the gerund or the present participle, depending on how you look at it. But here it's actually quite a valuable comparison. In Japanese, the te form is occasionally used to describe the manner in which an action is performed. So I can say something like the following. Uta o utatte kodomo tachi o tanoshimaseta. So what does this mean? It's something like, I entertained the children by singing a song. Though in terms of the word order, obviously it's more like singing a song, I entertained the children. However you translate it into English, the point is that the te form is being used to describe the fashion or the manner in which an action is performed. Now the verb iwau in Japanese means to celebrate, and the verb negau means to hope or to hope for. So between them, these two guys are saying, celebrating our new relationship and friendship, hoping for our mutual flourishing, and then there's a kind of ... because the sentence hasn't actually been finished. If you ask yourself what's missing is going to be something like, we will work together, we will cooperate, we will collaborate. In English, that could go at the beginning or the end of the sentence. In Japanese, technically, strictly speaking, it has to come at the end after these expressions with the te forms. Remember that in Japanese, a hanging te form, a te form that doesn't seem to be juxtaposed with anything else, is often a request. So if you get, for example, それやめて or これを使って, then you have to expect that to be a request. But these are not requests, right? It's important not to interpret them in that fashion. In Japanese, a lot of stuff is effectively left dangling, and this is an example of that with the te form.
すぐに立たねばならないのが残念ですよ。ここからの眺めは素晴らしい。
この次はご一緒に食事でも。
すぐに立たねばならないのが残念ですよ。ここからの眺めは素晴らしい。
この次はご一緒に食事でも。
I just want to talk a little bit here about this tataneba naranai. This is an expression that is used to talk about the fact that we have to do something, or that somebody has to do something or must do something. If you're familiar with this type of expression, and you probably are by now, then you might be wondering why they don't say, or why this guy in the grey suit doesn't say tatanakereba. Why is it tataneba? What's going on there? There is an archaic negative form in Japanese that ends in nu. So tatanai. So you have the verb to leave, which is tatsu, right? And we have tatanai as the normal negative form. But we also have tatanu. Now this isn't used in normal modern colloquial Japanese. I feel weird just saying it. It's not something that you ever really say. But the point is that the ba form of tatanu is obviously tataneba. No, this doesn't mean that you have to memorize a whole new set of ba forms. It doesn't work like that. You don't want to use this expression yourself. You just want to recognize it when you hear it, okay? So instead of having tatanakereba naranai, you get tataneba naranai. That's it. It means the same thing. I was told a long time ago, I can't remember who by exactly, but I was told a long time ago that this form, tataneba naranai, was never actually used in any period of Japanese history. Apparently it was created retrospectively. Japanese people started to say to themselves, well, we've got tatanu, so we should be able to shoehorn that somehow into this expression, tatanakereba naranai. And they did that by saying tataneba naranai. But apparently nobody ever actually spoke like that in Japanese. It's something you see mainly in formal writing. You wouldn't expect to hear it in normal conversation. This conversation in Cowboy Bebop in this episode is not a normal conversation. It's a very formal occasion. There's some sort of treaty being signed here between two criminal organizations, so it's an unusual context, right? And it's an anime, and you know that strange expressions can be used in anime.
うちの料理長が作る広東料理は景色に勝るとも劣らないものでしてね。
それは嬉しいお誘いですな。しかし
うちの料理長が作る広東料理は景色に勝るとも劣らないものでしてね。
それは嬉しいお誘いですな。しかし
Here we have a very sort of a highfalutin expression. 景色に勝るとも劣らないものでして。For God's sake, don't try and use things like this in real life when you're speaking Japanese. It's not the easiest expression to say smoothly, and even if you can say it smoothly, it's going to sound really strange. If you're very good, if you're very confident, then you can say it, I suppose, in a tongue-in-cheek way, but you don't want to try and incorporate things like this into the way you actually speak Japanese. It's not the easiest thing to say smoothly, to be honest, and if you stumble over it, then you're just going to sound like a wally, as we said in Britain when I was a kid. Basically what it means is that the Cantonese food in question is at least as good as the view and perhaps even better, but that is a fairly nuanced shade of meaning that you probably don't want to express that often anyway, to be honest. Just a quick note here about register. When you hear the word deshite, you know you perhaps know that is a polite te form. The te form of the copula da des in Japanese is normally de, but you can say deshite if you're being very polite. The guy in the grey suit here, when he says that the view from the window is amazing, what he actually says is this: ここからの眺めは素晴らしい. So why does he say that in the plain form? Why doesn't he say 素晴らしいです? If they're talking so politely to each other, why can he put it in the plain form? To be honest, it's really hard to say. Japanese people are not completely consistent in the way they use the polite and plain forms in Japanese. The general tone of the meeting here is very formal. If what you're saying is generally bookended, if you like, with polite forms, then slipping away from that occasionally and putting something into the plain form isn't going to come across as being rude. It's not necessary to be completely consistent in the way you use these things when you speak Japanese.
レッドドラゴンの幹部と食事をする日が来ようとは。
毒は入っていませんからご安心を。
レッドドラゴンの幹部と食事をする日が来ようとは。
毒は入っていませんからご安心を。
Now, why on earth would the Japanese use an expression like Red Doragon? They presumably have a word for red in Japanese, I'm pretty sure they do, and they presumably have some sort of word for dragon, and yeah, I'm pretty sure they do. So, why do they say Red Doragon? Doesn't that sound ridiculous? Here it's important to bear in mind that the Japanese brain obviously just doesn't interpret this stuff the way that we do. Red Doragon makes it sound foreign and exotic. However, unforeign and unexotic it may sound to us. Remember that the main villain of Cowboy Bebop is called Bishasu, and that is, of course, the Japanese version of the English word vicious. Doesn't that sound kind of stupid? Did his mum give him that name? Did she know what it meant? Is it written on his birth certificate? Did he get teased as a kid because of his stupid name? Those questions, of course, all miss the point. Most Japanese people, even many Japanese people who know English quite well, are not going to know the word vicious. It's not the first word you're going to learn when you learn English. So they're going to have to think about it, they're going to have to look it up, and that adds something to the exoticism. I suppose it makes the world seem deeper and more interesting to them. Think of Berserk. Think of Guts, everybody's favourite black swordsman. Guts, what kind of name is that? Do you know anyone called Guts? Do you think people were called Guts in the Middle Ages in Europe? Objectively speaking, Guts is kind of a silly name, and it gives you too much information too directly about what sort of character you're talking about. He's got a lot of guts, man, he's tough. But that's all said from my point of view, which is the point of view of a native speaker of English. The Japanese obviously don't interpret these things the way we do. Guts is a cool name. Gatsu, right? Bishasu, vicious, is a cool name. That's just the way they seem to interpret this stuff. And that's why Red Dragon seems to sound just fine to the Japanese. That's it for today. There's plenty more Cowboy Bebop coming down the pipeline, so I will see you then. Thanks very much. Bye bye. Ciao ciao.